The halls of the Galactic Council were filled with light and sound. Great screens showed maps of the stars, fleets moving like rivers of fire, empires spreading across the galaxy. Leaders of many worlds gathered here. Their voices were sharp, their pride endless. They spoke of trade, of borders, of power. To them, Earth was small, untested, and unimportant. But Earth had been speaking. Again and again, messages were sent out to the Council. The voice of humanity came through the channels, calm but firm. They spoke of a new weapon. They called it the railgun. It was not like the lasers and plasma beams that most species used. It was something simpler, colder. A weapon that hurled metal faster than sound, faster than thought, faster than shields could respond. The humans warned that this was not a theory. It was real. They had built it. They had tested it. And if war ever came, it would be used. The Council laughed. A tall alien with skin like glass tapped his claws against the table and said that humans always thought they were clever. A being with wings made of living light said humanity was trying to frighten the stars with toys. A giant with a voice like thunder said that no young race could make such weapons. The warnings were dismissed as arrogance. Earth wants to be noticed, they said. Earth wants to look strong. But back on Earth, the scientists and soldiers did not laugh. They worked in silence. In great underground chambers, huge railgun barrels were tested again and again. Sparks lit the darkness. Slabs of metal were fired into targets, tearing them apart as if they were paper. Every test was recorded. Every shot refined. The humans knew what was coming. They had seen the signs. The Council's patience was running thin. Humanity's independence was tolerated only because Earth was far, small, and unthreatening. But the moment Earth rose too quickly, the Council would act. That was the way of the galaxy. And so the humans sent their warnings, not out of pride, but out of necessity. They said, "Do not test us. Do not send fleets against us. We are ready." The messages echoed into the void. But no one believed. The Council meetings became louder. Reports came of alien fleets training, of armadas moving near the edges of human space. The signs were clear, but still the laughter continued. To the galaxy, humanity was still too young to matter. One scene played out in the grand chamber of the Council. An ambassador from Earth stood alone, surrounded by towering leaders of a dozen species. He spoke slowly, with no anger in his voice, only truth. He told them what a railgun could do. He told them how a single shot could pierce a warship in half. He told them that Earth would never bow, that if they were forced to fight, the stars themselves would burn. The chamber shook with laughter. The ambassador's words were recorded, replayed as a joke across alien networks. "The humans think they can kill fleets with sticks of metal," one council leader said. "How primitive! How amusing!" But behind the laughter, there was unease. Some alien commanders asked questions in private. Some wondered if the humans were hiding something. A few even suggested caution. But the Council's pride was stronger than its fear. They believed in their fleets and their shields, in their endless numbers. While the galaxy mocked, Earth prepared. The shipyards worked without rest. Human warships were not large, not shining with alien beauty. But each one carried the dark barrels of railguns, silent and waiting. Every ship became a hunter. Every crew became soldiers trained for survival. And so the warnings continued. Every week, every month, messages were sent. Humanity begged the galaxy to listen, not out of weakness, but out of the desire to avoid blood. But the Council's arrogance grew heavier. They called the warnings threats. They called them lies. They called them the noise of a small species dreaming too big. Reports came back from the edge of human space. Alien scouts were seen watching, recording, testing. Small clashes happened, ships lost in silence, but the Council denied it. They said no war was coming. They said Earth was safe under their shadow. But in the dark meeting rooms of Earth's leaders, the truth was known. War was already moving. The Armada was coming. Humanity had shouted its warnings, and the galaxy had covered its ears. In the cold vacuum of a hidden base near Saturn, a massive railgun ship waited. Its barrel pointed toward the stars, silent, ready, patient. The crew sat inside, calm, unshaken. They knew the council had not listened. They knew the fleets were gathering. And so they waited. The warnings had been spoken. The galaxy had refused to hear. The silence that followed was not peace. It was the silence before the first shot. In their hidden meetings, the leaders of the council whispered among themselves. Humanity had warned too many times, spoken too boldly, and refused to kneel. To them, it was no longer just arrogance. It was defiance. So a decision was made, not in one grand speech, not in one public vote, but in the shadows behind closed doors. The council would gather its fleets. They would move against Earth, not to destroy it entirely, but to crush its spirit. To remind the humans of their place. From 100 alien worlds, ships were summoned. From the frozen arsenals of the Athari, massive carriers began to rise into orbit. From the fiery forges of the Kellner, sleek destroyers slipped out into the void. The council called upon each member to contribute. One by one, the stars themselves seemed to answer. It was not just a fleet. It was an armada. The ships gathered near a neutral star system on the edge of council space. The void grew crowded with war machines. Thousands of ships stretched across the darkness, their engines glowing like suns. Cruisers formed lines like rivers of steel. Battleships floated like mountains. Carriers opened their bays and poured out wings of smaller craft. The Armada was so vast that it blotted out the stars in that part of the sky. To the galaxy, this was a spectacle. News feeds showed endless lines of alien ships preparing for what they called a lesson in order. To the Council, this was proof of strength. They believed Earth would see this fleet and surrender without a fight. But Earth did not surrender. While the Council built its Armada, Earth's shipyards burned with fire and noise. Human warships were smaller, fewer, older than the shining fleets of the galaxy. But each one carried the dark barrel of a railgun, built and perfected in secret. Every ship was a weapon. Every crew was trained not for glory, but for survival. Humanity knew the Council was coming, though no declaration was made. They saw the movement of fleets, the gathering of ships. They heard whispers from spies and traders who passed near the Council's mustering grounds. The storm was coming, and Earth was the target. At a lonely listening post orbiting a frozen moon, human officers watched the feed from their sensors. A single transmission came through, grainy, unstable, but clear enough. The Armada had been sighted. The officers said nothing at first. They only stared at the screen, at the endless sea of alien ships. Then, with steady voices, they reported back to command. The Council is moving. In the great halls of Earth's government, silence followed that message. Everyone had known it was coming, but seeing it confirmed was like ice in the blood. The leaders did not weep. They did not argue. They only nodded, and they gave the order. Prepare the fleets. Earth's defenses came alive. Railgun ships moved out of hidden docks, their long barrels gleaming in the dark. Platforms orbiting Saturn and Jupiter were activated, massive cannons rising from their shells like giants waking from sleep. The people of Earth were warned to be ready. Cities went dark. Shelters filled. Industries shifted to war. Yet still, the humans sent one last message. It was calm, simple, and without anger. We told you of our weapon. We told you not to test us. You bring your Armada. We will answer. But this will be the last warning. The Council received the message. They did not answer. Instead, they moved their ships closer to the Sol system. To them, humanity was desperate. To them, these words were not warnings, but pleas. They believed victory was already written in the stars. On the edge of the solar system, far past Pluto, human scouts reported the first signs of the approaching storm. Thousands of signals lit up their screens. The void itself seemed to move with the coming Armada. On Earth, in the silence of a darkened command room, the leaders stared at the display. A sea of red marks filled the screen, each one a ship, each one a weapon. The Council had gathered its storm. And humanity, small and quiet, stood waiting in its path. The Armada moved like a tide across the stars. Thousands of ships glided forward, their engines casting strange lights across the void. The commanders on board were confident. They believed this march into human space would be remembered only as a show of power, not a battle. To them, The outcome was already written. Humanity would surrender. But as the Armada crossed the dark edge of Sol, silence waited for them. Near Pluto's frozen orbit, human scouts detected the approach. Screens lit up in their command rooms. Signals poured in wave after wave until the void itself seemed to glow red with contacts. The scale of the fleet was overwhelming. To any other species, it would have meant despair. To the humans, it meant the test had come. On the Council's flagship, a massive vessel named Pride of the Hegemony, alien generals stood on bridges made of glass and light. They watched their endless ships spread across the system. They spoke of victory before the first shot was fired. On Earth's side, the human fleet was small, quiet, almost invisible in comparison. Their warships were shadows in the dark, scattered across Neptune's orbit. They did not speak of victory. They spoke of duty. The Council believed they were looking at prey. The humans knew they were staring at predators. The alien fleet slowed near Neptune. Orders were given to send forward a smaller group of ships. Their task was simple: demand surrender. A line of alien cruisers drifted closer, their weapons charged, their voices prepared for arrogance. They sent a signal toward the human fleet. The voice was loud, mocking, certain. Humans, your warnings have been heard and judged. Your weapons are toys. Your defiance is over. Surrender your fleets. Surrender your world. And we may leave you your cities. For a long moment, there was no answer. The humans said nothing. Silence stretched across the void, heavy and cold. The alien commanders laughed. They believed this silence was fear. They believed Earth's leaders had nothing left to say. Then, without a single word, the first railgun fired. It came from a small human cruiser hidden in Neptune's shadow. The barrel lit for only a second, a flash of fire and steel. Then the slug tore through space. No sound followed. Only speed. The alien cruiser it struck never had time to react. Shields flared. Hull plates bent. In a blink, the ship split apart. The laughter stopped. On alien bridges, silence spread. One ship lost. Then two. Then three. The humans fired again. Each railgun shot was like a hammer blow. Alien ships that had survived plasma storms and laser bombardments were torn apart by pieces of metal hurled faster than thought. Panic replaced arrogance. Alien captains shouted for evasive maneuvers, but their ships were too large, too slow. Human railguns fired from distances the aliens had never imagined. Shields flickered and failed. Armor cracked and shattered. The first fleet of the Council, meant to crush humanity, began to bleed in the cold dark near Neptune. Still, the humans did not speak. They did not send threats or demands. They only fired, precise and steady, as if the battle had been rehearsed 1,000 times. Each shot was a warning answered. Each impact was a truth the Council had refused to hear. The Council's flagship ordered a full assault. Thousands of ships pushed forward, filling the void with energy beams and plasma storms. The darkness lit up with fire. Human ships weaved between shots, shields burning, but the railguns kept firing. The void echoed with destruction. Alien cruisers that had mocked the humans now exploded into drifting wreckage. Carriers spilled fighters into the battle, but even they were torn apart by the piercing slugs of railguns. On Earth's command deck, the human leaders watched in silence. They did not cheer as alien ships fell. They did not celebrate as the tide began to turn. Their faces were pale, their eyes unblinking. They knew this was only the beginning. An alien destroyer lunged toward a human frigate, plasma cannons blazing. The frigate's shields buckled. But before the destroyer could finish its attack, a railgun slug from across the battlefield pierced its reactor core. The destroyer vanished in a ball of white fire. In the Council flagship, generals shouted over one another. "How are they doing this?" one demanded. "Their weapons are primitive. Nothing but accelerated metal." But the answer was already visible on their screens. The humans weren't fighting with technology. They were fighting with geometry. Every railgun position had been calculated months in advance. Every firing solution had been tested against simulations of this exact fleet. The humans knew where the alien ships would be before the aliens themselves knew. The Armada's advance ground to a halt. Ships that had been pushing forward now struggled to hold position. Wreckage drifted in their path. Communications channels filled with static and screams. On the human side, the railguns cooled. Gunners reloaded. Officers reported firing solutions. And in the cold dark near Neptune, the first great wave of the Council's Armada had already been reduced to a graveyard of twisted metal and fading light. The battle was not over. But the galaxy was watching now. And for the first time, the Council's commanders felt something they had never expected to feel. Fear. The Council's flagship, Pride of the Hegemony, drifted through a field of its own dead. Admiral Therox of the Veth Dominion stared at the tactical display, his mandibles frozen in disbelief. 3 hours ago, he had commanded the largest armada assembled in a century. 12,000 ships, drawn from 17 species, enough firepower to crack a planet. Now, less than half remained. "Report," he said, his voice hollow. His tactical officer, a young Keth called Sorvath, pointed to the flickering icons on the display. "The human fleet has withdrawn beyond Neptune. They're not pursuing. They're waiting." "Waiting for what?" Sorvath hesitated. "I believe they're waiting for us to decide." Therox turned from the display. Outside the viewport, wreckage drifted in endless silence. A human railgun slug had torn through the Pride's forward section an hour ago. Not a kill shot, but a warning. The impact had cracked the main viewing glass. Cracks spiderwebbed across the transparent alloy like frozen lightning. He remembered the warnings. Every human transmission over the past decade. The comm voices describing what their weapons could do. The graphs, the test footage, the mathematical proofs. He had dismissed them as propaganda. They all had. "Admiral," Sorvath said, "the Council is demanding an update. They're receiving civilian news feeds. The battle is public now. Every species in the galaxy is watching." Therox closed his eyes. He thought of the first railgun shot, the one that had split the cruiser Swift Vengeance into 2 halves. He had watched it happen. The ship had not exploded. It had simply separated. Cleanly, as if cut by a god's blade. "Open a channel to the human fleet," he said. "Admiral, the Council's orders." The Council's orders got 11,000 ships destroyed. Therox's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a man who had nothing left to lose. "Open the channel." The screen flickered. A human face appeared, a woman, perhaps 50 standard years old, with gray-streaked hair and eyes that had seen too much. Her uniform was plain, unadorned except for a single insignia, Earth. She did not speak first. "This is Admiral Therox of the Veth Dominion," he said. "I am requesting terms." The woman studied him for a moment. Then she said, "Admiral Therox, I am Fleet Commander Sarah Vallon of the United Earth Navy. You are not in a position to request terms. You are in a position to accept them." Therox's mandibles clicked, not in anger, but in acknowledgement. "Then state them." Commander Vallon leaned closer to her camera. "First, your fleet will withdraw beyond the orbit of Pluto within 6 hours. Second, you will transmit a full account of this engagement to every Council member species, unredacted, including the footage from your own sensors. Third, you will carry a message back to your Council. Tell them we do not want war. Tell them we warned you. And tell them that the next fleet they send, if they send another, will not be allowed to retreat." Therox was silent for a long moment. "And if the Council refuses, then the next battle will not be fought near Neptune. It will be fought near your home worlds. Our railguns have the range." She cut the channel. Therox stared at the dark screen. Around him, his bridge crew waited in silence. Some were weeping, not from fear, but from something worse. Shame. They had come as conquerors. They were leaving as survivors. "Helm," Therox said, "set course for the edge of the system. All ships. Maximum burn." The Pride of the Hegemony turned. Behind it, the remnants of the Armada followed, a long, broken column of warships limping toward the dark. No one spoke on the fleet channels. There was nothing left to say. On Earth, Commander Sarah Vallon stood in the command center, watching the alien fleet retreat on the main display. Around her, officers worked in quiet efficiency, damage reports, casualty lists, ammunition counts. No one cheered. No one celebrated. "Commander," a young lieutenant said, "we lost 17 ships. 3,600 personnel." Valen nodded. She had known the number before he spoke. She had been counting. "They'll come back," another officer said. Not a question. A prediction. "Yes," Valen said. "But next time, they'll listen first. That's the difference." She turned from the display and walked to the window. Outside, the night was clear. Stars shone down on the city, the same stars that had watched humanity take its first steps into space, that had watched them fail and falter and fight, that had watched them refuse to stop. The warnings had been spoken. The galaxy had refused to hear. Now the galaxy had seen. And nothing, would ever be the same. The retreat of the Armada was not silent. Across every council world, news feeds played the footage on repeat, human railgun slugs tearing through warships as if they were paper. The laughter that had once filled council chambers had been replaced by something colder. Questions. Demands for answers. And beneath both, a growing unease that no one wanted to name. In the Veth Dominion's capital city of Thraxor Prime, the council convened an emergency session. Admiral Therox stood before them, his uniform still marked with the scorch of battle. He had not changed clothes since returning. He had not slept. "Speak," commanded High Counselor Vexith. Her voice was sharp, but her eyes betrayed her. She had been one of the loudest voices calling for Earth's subjugation. Therox spoke for 40 minutes. He described the railgun's effects in clinical detail, the way shields did not stop the slugs, the way armor cracked like ice, the way ships simply ended. He played the sensor logs. He showed the trajectories, human projectiles crossing millions of kilometers in seconds, guided not by sophisticated tracking systems but by simple, elegant mathematics. "They knew where we would be before we did," Therox said. "They had calculated our formation, our speed, our likely maneuvers. Every shot was pre-sighted. Every kill was planned." Counselor Vexith leaned forward. "And their losses? 17 ships. 3,600 personnel." Therox paused. "We lost 11,000 ships. Over 200,000 personnel." The chamber went still. A sound like wind through dead leaves, the intake of breath from 17 delegations at once. "They could have destroyed us all," Therox continued. "They chose not to." Commander Valen made that clear. Her exact words, "We do not want war." She gave us terms. Withdrawal. Transparency. A message to this council. He looked directly at Vexith. The message was this: the next fleet will not be allowed to retreat. Vexith's mandibles clicked, a nervous gesture she had not displayed in decades. "They are bluffing." "They are not bluffing." Therox's voice was flat. "I have studied their history. The humans do not bluff. They warn. They prepare. And then they act. We ignored their warnings. We dismissed their preparations. Now we have witnessed their action." He turned to leave. "I recommend you do not force them to act again." The chamber erupted into chaos. Delegations shouted over each other. Some demanded an immediate counterstrike. Others called for negotiations. A few, the smaller species, the ones who had always been dismissed, sat in silence, watching the old powers tear at each other. In the confusion, no one noticed the Merith delegate. She was small, amphibian, her homeworld a marginal colony that had only joined the council 20 years ago. She had voted against the Armada. No one had listened. She slipped out of the chamber and made a private transmission. The recipient was not on any council world. The recipient was on Earth. Commander Sarah Valen received the message 6 hours later. It was short, encrypted, and unsigned. "The council is divided. Some want war. Some want peace. The ones who want war are louder. But they are not the majority. If you give them time, they will destroy themselves. The question is whether you have time." Valen read it twice. Then she forwarded it to her intelligence staff. "Trace this," she said. "Already tracing," replied Lieutenant Marcus Webb. "It's coming from inside the Council's primary communications hub. Someone with high-level access is feeding us information." "A friend," Valen said. or someone who wants us to think they're a friend. Valen considered this. They voted against the Armada. The Mareth delegate. She was the only one. She looked at Webb. Send a response. One word, received. Yes, ma'am. Webb typed. The message vanished into the encrypted void. Valen turned back to the display. The Armada's wreckage was still drifting near Neptune. Recovery ships, human and, surprisingly, a few alien vessels that had broken from the fleet to offer assistance, were picking up survivors. The Council had not authorized the assistance. The captains had acted on their own. That was interesting. That was something to file away. Lieutenant, Valen said, pull up everything we have on the Mareth species. Their history, their Council voting record, their military capabilities. Ma'am, they barely have a military. They're a scientific species. They joined the Council for research access. Exactly, Valen said. A species with no military voted against sending an Armada. Why? Webb had no answer. But he began typing. Outside the window, the stars were the same stars that had watched humanity for millennia. But something had changed. The galaxy was no longer ignoring them. The question was what the galaxy would do next, and whether humanity would have to fire another shot to remind them. The Council fractured within days. The Veth Dominion demanded a second Armada, larger than the first. The Kellner refused to contribute. The Athari withdrew from all Council military agreements. The Mareth submitted a formal motion to recognize Earth as a sovereign power with full diplomatic standing. The motion failed, but the vote was close. Closer than anyone expected. On Earth, the railgun ships remained at their posts. Their crews waited. The barrels were cool now, but the ammunition magazines were full. Commander Valen walked the decks of the flagship Hammer of Sol, speaking to each crew member by name. She had learned all 3,000 of them. She believed in knowing who you were asking to die. They're not coming back, said Lieutenant Webb, falling into step beside her. The Council. They're too busy fighting each other. They'll come back, Valen said. Not tomorrow. Not next year. But eventually. Empires don't forget humiliation. They just delay revenge. So we wait. So we prepare. She stopped at a viewport, looking out at the stars. We've been preparing for 40 years. A few more won't hurt. The Mareth delegate sent another message. This one was longer. It contained detailed intelligence about the Council's internal divisions, who was allied with whom, which species were considering independent treaties with Earth, which admirals had lost faith in the Council's leadership. It ended with a single sentence, "You are not alone." Valen forwarded the message to the Secretary General. The response came back in 2 hours. Begin drafting formal treaty proposals for the Mareth and any other species that reach out. We're building something new. The Alliance of Independent Systems was not born in a single moment. It grew slowly, quietly, through back channels and encrypted messages. The Mareth were the first to sign. Then the Kellner, not the Council representatives, but a faction within their military that had lost family in the Armada and wanted answers. Then a dozen smaller species who had watched the Council's arrogance for centuries and seen Earth as a better alternative. Within a year, the Alliance had 17 members. Within 2 years, 43. The Council still existed, but its sessions were sparsely attended. Its resolutions were ignored. Its fleets sat in port, their crews uncertain of what they were supposed to be fighting for. Admiral Therox retired from the Veth military. He wrote a memoir that became a bestseller across 17 systems. In it, he described the moment the first railgun shot hit the Swift Vengeance, the silence, the fire, the realization that everything he had believed about power was wrong. He dedicated the book to Commander Valen, whom he had never met but never forgotten. The book's final line became famous, "They warned us." We laughed. Then we learned that laughter is not a defense against math. Commander Sarah Valen was promoted to Admiral. She did not celebrate. She accepted the promotion in a small ceremony, standing before a wall of names, the 3,600 who had not come home from Neptune. She spoke for less than a minute. We did not want this war. We still do not want it. But we will not apologize for surviving it. And we will not forget those who made survival possible. She stepped down. The ceremony ended. The wall of names glowed softly in the dim light. 10 years after the Battle of Neptune, the Galactic Council held its last formal session. Only 4 species attended. The Veth Dominion sent a junior delegate who read a prepared statement and left. The Marath did not attend. They were too busy hosting the Alliance's annual summit on their home world. The Council's chambers were empty now. The great screens were dark. The tiers that had once been color-coded to home worlds were covered in dust. No one came to clean them. No one cared. At the edge of the Sol system, a railgun platform drifted in silent orbit. Its crew rotated every 6 months, but the mission never changed. Watch. Wait. Be ready. The platform's commander, a young woman named Elena Voss, granddaughter of Admiral Vallon, stood at the viewport, looking out at the stars. Her grandmother had told her stories of the battle, of the silence before the first shot, of the Council's laughter that turned to screams. "Do you think they'll come back?" her second-in-command asked. Elena considered the question. "If they do, we'll be ready. If they don't, we'll keep building. Either way, we win." She turned from the viewport and walked back to her station. The stars watched. They always watched. And somewhere, in a quiet room on Earth, Admiral Sarah Vallon, now old, now gray, now at peace, closed her eyes and dreamed of metal hurled faster than thought, of shields that could not hold, of a galaxy that had finally learned to listen. She smiled. Then she slept. The warnings had been spoken. The galaxy had refused to hear. But in the end, the galaxy had learned. That was enough. That was everything. 20 years after the Battle of Neptune, a small museum opened on the outskirts of Berlin. It was not a grand building, just a converted warehouse with polished floors and good lighting. But its exhibits drew visitors from across the galaxy. The centerpiece was a railgun slug. Not a replica. The actual slug that had split the Swift Vengeance in 2. It sat behind glass, no larger than a loaf of bread, its surface still scarred from the journey. Beside it, a plaque read, "Speed, 12,000 kilometers per second. Mass, 8 kilograms. Kinetic energy, equivalent to 15 kilotons of TNT." The Council's shields were designed to stop energy weapons. They were not designed to stop this. Schoolchildren from a dozen species filed past, their translators murmuring the words into their ears. Some took notes. Some stared in silence. A few reached out to touch the glass, as if hoping to feel the impact. Admiral Sarah Vallon did not attend the opening ceremony. She was 93 years old, living in a small house on the coast of Nova Scotia, where she spent her days gardening and her evenings watching the stars. But she sent a message, read aloud by the museum director. "They asked us why we built railguns. We told them, because they are simple, because they are reliable, and because no one believes a piece of metal can end an empire. Now they believe. Remember that. And remember what we built them to protect. Not our pride, not our power, but our right to exist without asking permission." The audience applauded. The museum director wiped her eyes. The railgun slug sat behind its glass, silent and patient, exactly as it had been on the day it changed the galaxy. The Alliance of Independent Systems grew to include over 200 species. The Galactic Council did not dissolve, it simply faded, like an old photograph left in the sun. Its last remaining members eventually applied for Alliance Observer status. The Veth Dominion was among them. Their application was processed in the standard manner, with no special treatment and no extra delays. Admiral Therox died 11 years after the battle. His funeral was attended by humans and Veth alike, former enemies standing shoulder to shoulder in a field of white stone. Commander, now Admiral, Elena Voss delivered the eulogy. "He wrote that laughter is not a defense against math," she said. "But he also wrote that pride is not a defense against truth. He learned that lesson the hard way. And he spent the rest of his life teaching it to others. We are here because he learned. We are here because we all learned." She stepped back. The stones stood in silence. The wind blew across the field. On Earth, the railgun platforms were gradually decommissioned. Not because they were no longer needed, but because they were no longer necessary. The Alliance's mutual defense agreements made unilateral action obsolete. The platforms were replaced with research stations, deep space observatories, and a single communications relay that broadcast Earth's messages to every corner of known space. The messages were not warnings anymore. They were greetings, invitations, questions. Who are you? What have you built? Would you like to see what we have built together? The galaxy answered, not with fleets, with voices, with ships full of diplomats and scientists and artists and traders, with children who had never known a time when Earth was dismissed, who grew up in a universe where humanity was not a cautionary tale but a partner. Commander Sarah Vallon, old, gray, at peace, sat on her porch and watched the night sky. A ship passed overhead, its running lights blinking in the darkness. A Marath vessel, probably. Or a Kellner. Or one of the new species whose name she still struggled to pronounce. She smiled. The stars did not answer. They never did. But they did not need to. She had spent her life making sure that humanity would never have to ask them for permission again. The warnings had been spoken. The galaxy had refused to hear. But in the end, the galaxy had listened. And that, not the railguns, not the battle, not the victory, was the real weapon. The willingness to speak. The patience to wait. The strength to forgive. She closed her eyes. The stars turned. The galaxy continued. And somewhere, in a museum in Berlin, a piece of metal sat behind glass, a reminder of what happens when a small species with a simple weapon refuses to kneel. The warnings had been spoken. The galaxy had heard. That was enough. That was everything.